I have thought about what I would say if anyone ever asked me to explain it. I have rehearsed the words in the dark, in the years since the station went quiet and the official record was sealed, and the people who signed the orders convinced themselves that what happened up there was a contained incident, a technical failure, a tragic accident involving personnel whose deaths were already predicted by their own equipment. I have rehearsed the words and I have never once gotten them right, because the thing that happened to us on Relay 8 does not fit inside the kind of language that courts and committees use. It fits inside a different kind of language. The kind your father uses at 3 in the morning when the money is gone, and the door is locked, and there is nothing left to do but sit at the kitchen table and stare at the wall, and decide what kind of man you are going to be. My father was a gambler, not the casino kind, not the sportsbook kind, not any kind that had a glamorous name attached to it. He was the kind of man who bet on certainties that weren't certain, who mistook confidence for knowledge, who died at 62 with an empty wallet and a storage unit full of things he'd intended to sell. I swore I would not be him. I swore it every morning for 30 years, and I kept that promise in every way that mattered and in some ways that didn't. And then I ended up on a relay station with a machine that showed you the next hour of your life. And I found out that the promise I'd made to myself was not as clean as I'd thought. My name is Jim. I was a materials analyst. I was the least important person on the research team, which is exactly why Landau picked me. Let me tell you about Landau first, because you need to understand what kind of man builds something like that and what he thinks it's for. He introduced himself as a private investor with a background in applied physics. British accent, hand-tailored suit, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes because his eyes were always doing math. He assembled the team through intermediaries, the kind of job offers that arrive without a company name attached, with compensation numbers that make you stop asking questions. He brought us to A-Tate, which was a decommissioned communications relay in a degrading low orbit, retrofitted with a pressurized habitat module, a small but capable machine shop, and enough computing power to run the displacement array. That was what he called it, the displacement array, like it was an antenna, like it was something that pointed at the sky and waited. What it actually was, I understand now better than I did then. It was a door that opened into a room that had already been used. The team was 6 people besides Landau. Wishman was a researcher, brilliant and abrasive, the kind of man who had been asked to leave institutions, not because he was wrong, but because he made everyone around him feel small for not seeing what he saw. Abaricki was the systems technician, confined to a mobility rig after an accident with a coolant line 3 years prior. The accident had taken the use of his legs and given him, in some exchange the universe must have considered fair, an almost supernatural patience, and an eye for detail that the rest of us couldn't match. Fraker was the astrophysicist, quiet and precise, the one who had actually done the math that proved the displacement principle was theoretically sound. Then there was Gale. I will get to Gale. There were also 2 people on A-Tate that most of us didn't know about. Not until later. Agents, assigned to an agency that officially didn't operate in orbital space, monitoring the project from a maintenance compartment 1 level down. Their names were Vukovic and Traxler. Vukovic was the senior. I've since been told she identified all of us through open-source records in about 40 minutes. She had a file on Landau that she was not permitted to act on. She had a file on me that said, in summary, that I was not a significant factor. She was not wrong at the time. The displacement array worked on a simple principle that is not simple at all. It used an induced resonance field to push a biological subject forward along the local timeline, not fast, not in a Hollywood flash, but in a genuine displacement, a physical translation of matter from the current moment to a moment 60 minutes ahead. The subject would arrive intact in that future moment, remain there for a fixed window determined by the field decay rate, and then be pulled back to the origination point. You went forward. You looked around. You came back. You told people what you saw. That was the theory. Landau chose me for the first transit. He told the others it was a calculated decision based on risk distribution, which was true, but the calculation he had done was simpler than he made it sound. I was the one nobody would miss if the math was wrong. Abericki, Wishman, and Fraker made this very clear to each other in a conversation they had in the machine shop while I was running pre-transit checks. A conversation that Abericki, out of some habit of documentation that I have come to regard as the reason any of us survived, recorded on his handset without telling anyone. I did not know about the recording at the time. I learned about it an hour later in the worst possible way. The transit itself was not painful. That is the honest answer to the question everyone eventually asks. It was disorienting, a sensation like the station lurching sideways while remaining perfectly still, a white pressure behind the eyes, the smell of something like ozone and something else that had no name I could put to it. And then I was standing in the same room, in the same body, wearing the same clothes, and the room was different. Not different in its layout. Different in the way a room is different when something has happened in it that cannot be unhappened. The lights were at emergency level, the red-orange of battery backup. The primary workstations were dark. There was a smell in the recycled air that I recognized from a cargo accident I had witnessed as a young man, the particular smell of biological matter that has been catastrophically exposed to pressure differential. Not a lot of it. Enough. I called out, nobody answered. I moved through the compartments carefully, the way you move when you do not want to confirm what you already know. In the corridor outside the main lab I found Abericki. He was propped against the bulkhead, one hand pressed against his side, the suit around his midsection dark and wet. He was alive. He looked up at me with an expression that I have spent years trying to categorize and have settled on as recognition that contains no surprise. "Camera," he said. He held out his handset. "Take the camera." I took it. I asked him what had happened. He shook his head, not dismissively, but with the particular economy of a man who has run his calculations and determined that explanation costs more time than he has left. He said one sentence. He said, "Don't become what you see." I did not understand what he meant. I put the camera in my pocket. In the distance, around a corner, I heard Gale. Not words, a sound. The sound a person makes when they are being moved against their will, when they are fighting and not yet losing but not yet winning. I ran. I was 20 meters away when the elevator sealed and the indicator went dark, and I was standing in an empty corridor with the sound fading into the structure of the station. I went back to the displacement point, and I held on to the housing of the array, and I waited. The field decay did the rest. 60 seconds later I was back in my own present, standing in the lit and operational lab with 5 surprised people staring at me, and Landau checking his watch with an expression that said he was pleased the machine had not killed me, though he had been prepared for either outcome. I told them what I had seen. I told them about the blood and the dark and Abericki dying against the bulkhead and Gale in the elevator. I told them about the smell. They did not believe me, not fully, not immediately, in the way that people do not believe testimony that requires them to revise a comfortable assumption. Wishman said I had experienced displacement psychosis. Fraker said the results were consistent with a traumatic hypnagogic episode. Abericki said nothing. He was working on the handset I had brought back, running a data recovery protocol on whatever had been recorded on it in the future. And his expression was the focused expression of a man who does not yet know what he is about to find, but suspects it will be important. Wishman took a weapon from the locker, a compact sidearm that Landau kept for what he called contingency purposes, and said he would go forward and see for himself. Landau did not try very hard to stop him. I remember thinking, watching Wishman suit up at the array platform with the brisk confidence of a man who has decided that other people's fear is a measurement of their inadequacy, that I did not like him but I did not want him to die. Both things were true. He was in transit for approximately 4 seconds, then his head came back. Not the rest of him, not gradually, not partially. Just the head, returned by whatever mechanism governs what the field will carry, dropped at the base of the array housing like a message left for a specific recipient. Nobody moved for a long time. Fraker was the one who finally spoke. He said that they needed to send a warning back. Someone needed to go back 61 minutes and tell the past version of the team to shut the array down. He said it the way an engineer says something that is technically elegant and emotionally terrible. Abericki told him about the causality problem. If you send a warning back to a moment that already contains you moving forward, you create a loop that requires the warning to always have been sent, which means the conditions that generated the warning must also always occur, which means the warning cannot prevent what it is warning against. It can only confirm it. Fraker stared at the base of the array housing where Wishman's head had been, which Abericki had covered with a thermal blanket. He said that was not acceptable. He started configuring the array for a backward transit. Abericki said, "Fraker, I found the file on the camera." He put the recording on the main display. All of us, including Fraker, watched the footage of Abericki and Wishman and Fraker themselves, recorded in this room not 2 hours ago, discussing why I was the best candidate for transit because I was the least irreplaceable member of the team. Fraker watched himself say these things. He watched his own voice come out of his own mouth, measured and dismissive, and I watched his face do something it had never done in all the weeks I had worked beside him, which was go red. Gail did not watch. She was looking at me. I am still not sure what her expression meant. Fraker got into the array and sent himself back anyway. He said he was sorry. He said he had to try. The array hummed, the field initialized, and Fraker went back 61 minutes. 4 minutes later, the future version of Fraker arrived, the one who had been to the past and found it impossible to change. And the difference between the man who had stepped onto the platform and the man who stepped off was the difference between someone carrying a weight and someone who has put it down, not because the burden is gone, but because the body has simply stopped being able to hold it. He told us the warning did not work. He was already dead before he finished the sentence. Assailant was masked. That detail sounds like something from a different kind of story, a thriller, a puzzle, the kind of narrative where the masked figure is a dramatic device that eventually resolves into a satisfying revelation. It did not feel like that. It felt like what it was, which was a person who knew this environment, who knew our positions, who was moving with purpose and not with anger, not with the kind of violence that announces itself. Deliberate violence. Violence as methodology. Gail hit the assailant twice, which is how I know she had training that her file as a materials physicist did not account for. The second hit took the mask off. The assailant ran. Gail looked at her own hands for a moment, and then she looked at me and she said, "I need to tell you something." She was an intelligence agent. She had been on ATATE for 4 months, embedded in the team, assigned to document the project and assess whether Landau was operating under a foreign mandate or acting independently. She said she had not been using me. She said the relationship was real. She said this in the particular voice of a person who has rehearsed the sentence and knows it will not land the way it was rehearsed, and who says it anyway because truth is the only tool they have left. I did not know what to do with that information. I filed it somewhere I could not access yet and focused on what was in front of us. What was in front of us in the next 10 minutes was Landau. He appeared from the equipment bay with a blade in his hand and an expression that had stopped performing the role of a composed investor and was now showing something else. Landau, cornered, was a man running a calculation in real time and not liking the results. We took the blade away from him. We found, in his case, a storage disk. The disk was old. Not archival old, not damaged old in the way that physical media from a generation ago is old, made in a facility that had been closed for years. It contained financial records, market positions taken years before the events they were positioned for. Security codes for accounts that predated the station by a decade. Landau said a name. He said the name Max Devlin. He said Devlin had sent him the disc, through a mechanism he did not fully understand but had accepted as genuine because the information on it had made him very wealthy. And he said he had used that wealth to fund a Tate to build the array, to assemble us, because he needed the prototype, the imperfect, brain-burning prototype, to exist before he could build the version that worked. He needed the proof of concept before he could have the real thing. He said he believed Devlin might be a future version of himself, operating under an alias. He said all of this without apology, in the voice of a man who has decided that the scale of the outcome justifies the arithmetic of the means, and I hit him. I want to be accurate about this. I didn't lose control. I did not go somewhere unreachable. I hit him because he had used me as a component, had looked at a human being and seen a test part, and because my father had died telling himself the same story, that the end justified the means, that the bet was worth the cost, that the people in the way of the plan were variables and not people. Abericki, in the meantime, had resigned. That is the word I use for it. He had accessed more of the camera footage and had seen himself dying, and he had made the decision, with the same methodical quiet he brought to everything, that the footage represented a fixed outcome, and that fighting it was a form of self-deception he was not willing to commit to. He sat down in his mobility rig at the edge of the main lab and he waited. I tried to talk him out of it. He said he appreciated that I tried. He said that the specific failure mode of humans was the refusal to accept what the evidence demonstrated, and that he meant it as a compliment. The assailant came back and stabbed him while I was at the array platform. I did not see it happen. I heard it. And then the masked figure turned to me and took the mask off. I have thought about what I would say about that moment for a long time. The man behind the mask was older than me by what I estimated as 10 years, though later I understood it was less time and displacement does things to the face, to the connective tissue, to the particular light in the eyes. He was missing the left eye. The socket was sealed over, not surgically, not cleanly, in the way that happens when tissue is allowed to close without intervention. He held the blade the way a man holds a tool he has used many times. He said my name. He said it the way you say the name of someone you've stopped expecting anything from. I said, "That's not me." He said, "Not yet." What followed was not an argument exactly. It was a negotiation between a version of a man who had decided what he was going to become and the earlier version of that man who was being asked to agree to it. Future me, and I will call him that, because the alternative is to give him a different name, and I am not ready to do that. I may never be ready to do that. Future me laid out the logic. He had made the error. He had let the machine damage him, which it did to everyone who transited more than once, a cellular effect on the neural tissue that the research team had documented, and that Landau had considered acceptable losses. He had watched people he trusted and cared about be revealed as either complicit or too compromised to be relied on. He had done the math that my father always did, the gambler's math, the math that says the only way to not be the one who loses is to be the one who controls the outcome, and the math had led him here. He told me to agree to it. He said the loop required it. He said it had already happened, therefore it would happen, therefore it was happening now, and the only question was whether I would do it consciously or be pushed into it by circumstance. I said no. He looked at me the way I imagine a man looks at a door that will not open, not with anger, not immediately, with the particular exhaustion of someone who has tried every key. Then he said, "Then at least understand that you started this for her." He meant Gail. Gail stepped between us. She said my name, not the name the future version of me used, but the name of the person she had actually known, the person who had worked beside her for months and told her about his father at midnight in the machine shop, and been honest about how frightened he was of becoming a man without worth. She said it directly, in the clear voice of a person who has made a decision and is not going back on it. Future me moved toward the elevator. He had the disc. Gail went after him. I want to tell this part carefully because I have not told it to anyone, and the weight of it has been in me for long enough that I think putting it down in words might make it lighter or might make it heavier, and I genuinely do not know which. The elevator opened. The agents from the level below, Vukovic and Traxler, who had been waiting for a window, a moment of structural predictability in a situation that had offered them very few, came through. Future me turned. He and Gale fought for the disc. She was smaller. She was faster. She had the particular ferocity of a person who has identified one thing she is certain of in an hour of uncertainty and is not willing to let it go. She killed him with the blade, the one he had used on Aberiki. She stood there afterward with the disc in her hand and her breathing at the controlled rate of someone who has been trained not to show what they are feeling. Vukovic asked her name for the official record. She said it. Her real name. Not the cover name she had used for 4 months. Not the name I had been calling her. Her real name was Maxine Devlin. She looked at me when she said it. She looked at me the way you look at someone when you are giving them information that changes something between you and you do not know how they will receive it. When you have to say the true thing and you cannot predict what it costs. I did not say anything. I don't think there was anything to say. The loop closed around that moment like a hand, and I understood, standing there with Aberiki's camera still in my pocket, and the sound of the station's recycled air cycling through a suddenly very quiet room, that Maxine Devlin had been the architect of everything. Not maliciously, not with cruelty. She had needed the machine to exist. She had needed it to be tested and found dangerous and eventually shut down, because the version of the machine that Landau built was not the version she would build, and the version she would build would not carry the cost that this one did. The disc that would eventually be sent to Landau, sent back, through the machine, when it was safe and controlled and the displacement field did not rot the tissue behind your eyes, had come from her. Max Devlin. Maxine. The loop had always required her to be there. She had not counted on caring about the people inside it. I think that is the part she did not plan for. Vukovic and Traxler sealed the station on standing orders and called for a recovery team. The remaining personnel were myself, Gale, and Landau, who was alive but had stopped speaking. The array was powered down. The documentation was classified at a level I was told, in a conversation that lasted 4 minutes, would make it functionally inaccessible for the foreseeable future. I was asked in that same conversation whether I had any intention of discussing what I had experienced. I said I understood the situation. The man conducting the conversation seemed to find this sufficient. I have not discussed it, until now. In this account that I am giving to no one, that I am writing for the particular therapeutic value of writing things down, of making the inside of your head into words that exist outside it. Here is what I have come to believe in the years since. The machine worked. I want to say that clearly because the official record describes it as a failed experiment, a proof of concept that demonstrated the principle was scientifically valid but practically catastrophic, and that framing is technically accurate but misses the point. The machine worked. It did the thing it was designed to do. The catastrophe was not mechanical. The catastrophe was what people did with the information it provided. We were shown the next hour of our lives and we tried to fight it, every single one of us in our different ways. Wishman fought it with arrogance. Fraker fought it with logic. Aberiki fought it with resignation, which is a kind of fighting that looks like acceptance. Landau fought it with money and planning and the comfortable conviction that he was the smartest person in any room. Future me fought it with rage, with the blade, with the decision to become the cause rather than the victim. I fought it with refusal. Simple, inarticulate, probably foolish refusal. I said no to a version of myself who had all the evidence. I said no because my father had taught me in his failure that the gambler's logic, accept the odds, work the angles, play the probabilities, was a machine for turning people into their worst version. I said no because Gale had looked at me with her real name behind her eyes and asked me to be the person she had actually known, and that person was not a man who had stopped fighting. The turn did not come from a weapon or a plan or a piece of information that changed the odds. It came from a woman who had arranged the entire situation and had then, somewhere in the middle of it, decided that the person she had arranged it around was worth more than the arrangement. I have thought about whether I should resent that. I have decided I don't. Not because I have resolved it intellectually, but because resentment is a gambler's emotion. It is what you feel when the hand you were dealt turns out not to be the hand you needed, and I have decided, with considerable effort, not to be a gambler. The disc is presumably still out there, somewhere in a sequenced set of instructions that will complete themselves when the conditions are right. The loop is presumably still running, somewhere at the edge of what is possible, the causality of it grinding along like a mechanism that cannot feel the weight it is carrying. Gail Maxine I have not spoken to since the station. I have started letters I have not sent. I know from the shape of the story that some version of us on some eventual day will need to close the loop, will need to generate the disk that Landau received, and that this means whatever is between us is not finished. The timeline requires it. The math says so. I am not a man who trusts the math. I learned that the hard way, 60 kilometers above the surface of the earth, in a room where a future version of myself was trying to convince me that what I would become was what I had always been. He was wrong. That is the only thing I am certain of. He was wrong, and I was tired, and I said no anyway, and that is the most human thing I have ever done. My father would not have understood it. He would have run the odds, identified the probability that resistance was futile, and folded his hand. He would have been practical about it. He was always practical about everything except the things that mattered. I am not him. I decided that a long time ago, in a kitchen that smelled like cigarettes and empty coffee cups, watching a man count what he had left and come up with nothing. I decided it again on a tape, with a blade between me and a version of myself that had made every practical decision, and arrived at a room full of people I had helped put on the floor. The loop wants what it wants. History wants what it wants. The machine showed me the next hour of my life, and it was full of blood and loss and a woman's voice in a closing elevator. I went into that hour anyway, with nothing except the refusal to be what I was being told I was. That is not heroism. Do not mistake it for that. It is stubbornness. It is the thing that humans do when the math says lie down. We stand up anyway, not because we have calculated the advantage, but because something in the marrow of us decides that the math is not the boss of us. Every species in the galaxy, the ones we've since confirmed exist and the ones we still haven't, they look at a fixed outcome and they adapt to it. They optimize. They accept the shape of what is coming and they maneuver within it. We argue with it. We find that undignified and correct it and go home, not because we can always win, because we have not yet fully learned that we can't. I am 51 years old. I have a small apartment and a job that does not involve displacement arrays. I have a father's photograph on the wall and his empty wallet in a drawer because I took it from the storage unit before they auctioned the contents, and I keep it there to remind myself what the practical decision costs when you make it every time. I have a letter I have started 7 times for Maxine Devlin. One of these days I will finish it. The last line will not be about the loop or the disk or the debt the timeline thinks I owe it. The last line will be the thing I should have said in that elevator corridor, with the indicator dark and the station quiet and a future version of me receding into the past where he belonged. The last line will be, I said no, you were worth saying no for. That is all. That is the whole of it. I was the expendable one. I was the least important variable. I went forward into a room full of consequences, and I came back without becoming what the consequences required. The math still hasn't forgiven me. I'll take that.